Բարի երեկո սիրելի հայրենագիտներ, անգամ եւս կմիանանք ցեզի վերադարձ այս ակտակրով, որոնց նպատակն է օգտակարել Հայաստանի, սակայն այսօրվա իմ ծրագիրս կապ չունի Հայաստանի հետ, այլ կապ ունի այս վերջին ընտրություններուն, որ տեղի պիտի ունենան նոյեմբեր 4-ին կոնգրեսական ընտրություններու հետ կապված, ուրեմն այդ առիթով մենք հրավիրեցինք երկու անձեր, որոնք այդ ուրեմն կոնգրեսի 28-րդ դիստրիկտի համար գուզեին մասնակցել եւ հիմա իմ պիտի փոխեմ մեր խոսակցությունը անգլերենի, որբեսի իմ հյուրս կարողանա մեր անգլերեն լեզվով ներկայացնել իր platform. Tonight's presentation, our TV program, will be concerned about the 28th California District House of Representative elections that will take place next week, November 4th. And that covers the Hollywood area, Glendale, Burbank, La Crescenta, and different other areas where a lot of Armenians live. In fact, that's the majority of Armenians. A lot of Armenians live in these areas, a big concentration. And we invited two candidates who are participating in this congressional district elections. The first person we invited, therefore, Congressman Adam Schiff. And on my side, we have the opponent, Mr. Steve Stokes. Welcome, Mr. Stokes. Unfortunately, we did not get a response from Mr. Schiff to be present tonight to give his positions regarding these elections. We are. That's why we have only one person, the opponent. Welcome, Mr. Stokes. I'm very happy that you were able to make it.
Thank you for inviting me.
Yes, and I'm glad that we have another candidate this year, because I believe Mr. Schiff has been on this in his position for a few times. You may know better. But since he is not here, we would like to hear your viewpoints regarding these congressional elections. Please, I'll give you the voice to give your presentation. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Hi, my name is Steve Stokes, and I am running for Congress here in the 28th District, which includes Glendale and Burbank and Hollywood, and also a lot of Los Angeles, Los Feliz, Silver Lake, Echo Park, and La Cañada, Tahunga, Sunland. So it's a large area. This is my lifelong home. I've lived here my entire life, and I love California. I love our cities, and I love our country. And I'm just so concerned with the state of our nation right now. I've never intended to be in politics. I have a great life. I've got a great career in business, and I'm not looking for a new career or business. But I'm just so concerned with the state of our nation that I could not stand back and do nothing. And so I've decided to run for Congress. I'm running as an independent. And I have voted as an independent my entire life. I vote for people and for ideas above party. And that's what I think will be the future of our country and the only way to get our country back on track. I'm so concerned that both parties, both Republicans and Democrats, they have agreed on what to disagree upon. And they are both in the hands of corporate interests, and our country is controlled by those interests. And it really disadvantages Americans. We need to have an open dialogue on all our really important issues before we can come up with honest solutions. And some of these issues like climate change are already so far advanced that even if we put all of our best heads together, we still will be extremely challenged. So we have to come together to get our future under control. Another issue that is just almost as big and as out of control is our debt. The national debt is growing by a huge amount every day, and it's really incredible that we need to balance our budgets. I mean, every family has to do this. Every business has to do this, but our government does not, and has not for a very long time.
The problem is that a lot of the money that is being spent, especially overseas, is going to overseas, international wars, etc., while the people is being neglected in a lot of instances where there are shortfalls of money in education, in other fields. So what do you think?
Absolutely. That's probably one of the most important things about being in Congress. And being in Congress is about being a generalist. Everything, all of our issues are important, and you have to be prepared to deal with a wide range of issues. And our congresspersons, some of them, they're not scientists, they're not necessarily economists, but in Congress we need to look at all these issues: science, medicine, technology. All of these things are controlled by the actions in Congress, and
which means basically looking into peaceful politics instead of war politics, which is what's happening in the Middle East today, in Ukraine, in other parts of the world. So the direction that you have, is it a peace direction or a war direction?
Well, absolutely. We need to keep our country secure, and that's really that's the purpose for a military, and we need to have a strong military to keep our country secure. But we should not be using that military to insert ourselves into situations unnecessarily around the world, and we do that with far too great frequency. It's really, it's a shame that, Eisenhower warned about the growth of the military-industrial complex, and it has come to pass. Here we are 50 years later, and the military-industrial complex is in control of our politics. They dictate our politics along with other corporate interests. And we spend a huge amount of our budget on the military. We need to, keep our country safe, but I know we need to manage our budgets, both military budgets and other budgets, so that we have money to take care of all of the important programs that we need here. But there's an extreme amount of unnecessary spending, especially in the military budget.
To what extent the voice of the people or the needs of the people are met through these policies? And I see that in your presentation you are representing the needs of the people and the voice of the people.
Absolutely. That's really what it comes down to. We have our country is supposed to work to benefit us and to advantage Americans. The whole point of having a country is that we are in control and we dictate the policies that provide solutions for us, and we have to make sure and hold our representatives accountable for that. And on a whole list of issues, I disagree with our current incumbent, which is Mr. Schiff. He's been in office for 14 years. And first of all, I believe in term limits. So I don't believe anyone should be in office for more than 8 years in the House of Representatives. I feel that it's great that you get experience, and if somebody were to be reelected 4 times, that means that should be because they're doing a fantastic job, and no one should be reelected except by their record. So I don't believe that our representatives should be out campaigning when they're getting paid by the taxpayers to actually do a job. So it really, congresspersons are paid extremely well, and they should be serving, and they should be earning their reelection by their works and by their votes. And so there's far too much money in politics, and the reason I'm running as an independent is because that is the case in both parties. Both Democrats and Republicans equally are at the hands of lobbyist control. One of the points that demonstrates this is Mr. Schiff. He voted for the Monsanto Protection Act, which is a bill to exclude producers of genetically modified foods from liability. Now, there's no company in the world should be excluded from liability. If Ford has an issue with their brakes, they're responsible for that. And to actually exclude a sector from judicial review was a terrible precedent. And it's incredible. Adam Schiff's a Democrat. Why would he vote for the Monsanto Protection Act? That's an issue that I feel it really demonstrates that he's clearly in control of corporate interests.
Yes, of course. Monsanto is a big chemical company, and they have a big influence, and therefore I'm glad that you look at it as a humanitarian way, because the GMO, which is genetically modified foods, is being distributed worldwide. And therefore, it's not only liability that doesn't apply only for this country, but for all over the world. And a lot of people, even in Armenia, they are complaining about that.
Absolutely. And many countries around the world actually ban GMOs outright.
Yes.
I'm not actually suggesting that we need to ban GMOs here in the United States, but I am suggesting I absolutely will fight to have GMOs labeled.
Exactly.
At the very least, we need to have our food labeled so Americans can make informed decisions about what they're eating.
And what are some of the other points?
Well, I'm also extremely concerned, and of course, with the fact that our country is under surveillance. It's just incredible that that we have surveillance, which obviously violates the Constitution, that's been in effect for the last 12 years, and the fact that we, as Americans, don't want this surveillance, and it's very clear that we don't. And I feel there's been a concerted effort by the media and by those in office to actually diminish and minimize this and kind of sweep it under the rug. And so, Adam Schiff has voted 6 times for surveillance on the American people.
What kind of surveillance?
Well, warrantless surveillance, the Patriot Act, the FISA Act, the Snowden revelations, which reveal the PRISM program, our digital lives. Americans live our lives, our digital lives now. And when
you mean computers,
internet, email, all of that information which we use to communicate and do business, we expect, and we had every presumption to believe that it was secure, and that only if somebody was violating the law would there be a warrant for surveillance on that individual. But now we've of course learned that surveillance is universal, and there's so many negative effects from that. There's just the loss of privacy, the fact that ideas, business plans, if any data can be compromised, and the more time, and when it's compromised already unknowingly by the government, it's obviously open to further situations where the data is vulnerable. And so that needs to be stopped. Americans know that, we want that, and in fact Adam Schiff actually on his website has stated that he's for reforming the NSA. And in fact, when I was starting to run, that was one of the things that I felt, well, Mr. Schiff appears to be supporting my position. And since I've started to run, I've realized that Schiff has voted 6 times from the Patriot Act to the Patriot Reauthorization, the FISA Act, the FISA Reauthorization, the FISA Sunset Extension. So 6 times he's voted to enhance and continue surveillance on American citizens. And just this year, June of this year, there was a well-regarded amendment, the Massey-Lofgren Amendment. Thomas Massey and Zoe Lofgren have a very well-regarded amendment by civil liberties organizations to reform the NSA. Schiff also voted against that just this year. So his words are hollow. The fact that he says that he wants to reform the NSA is patently false. And
so he has a two-way of playing on two cards and trying to play on two ways, let's say. Okay, you say Schiff voted to arrest citizens without charges and detain them indefinitely?
Yes, and I know so many citizens would be upset to even learn that such a law is on the books. That's the NDAA, National Defense Authorization Act from 2012. And in that Defense Appropriation Act, there is language, again, that allows citizens to be arrested without charges and detained indefinitely, which sounds like something out of a communist country or the worst civil rights offender anywhere around the world. So it's no wonder that that countries around the world look to here in America we're supposed to be the shining example of a democracy and of how to do things correctly. And at one point, we strove for that. America has never been perfect. We've had transgressions over the years, such as slavery, such as the Indians, Japanese internment. So there have been situations where America hasn't lived up to our high ideals. But we always depend on Americans to come in, make compensation, to bring these matters to attention, and to get our country back on track. And here in my lifetime, this is what our challenge is.
Yeah. Our time has almost finished. Last word. When will this election be, and what do you want to say to the public?
Well, we have just 4 more days before the election. The election is November 4th. November 4. So November 4th is the election. We have 4 days before that. We're working hard to get our message out. We need folks to talk to their neighbors. We really, as Americans, must re-involve ourselves with our democracy. There's no other way to save our democracy but to talk to our neighbors. Many times we don't want to talk about politics because politics itself is a contentious issue. But we all need to talk to our neighbors. And please inform everyone about the election. And I'm also looking for folks to distribute the word on our campaign. So,
I liked your idea when you said that after 8 years you need to change the people. In fact, a change is needed because we see that a continuous policy of Mr. Adam Schiff regarding the Middle East, Syria, Iraq, is a continuous destruction and supporting the foreign terrorists in Iraq, in Syria, and Libya has been the policy, and it seems that he's getting better in that, expanding his contact in that regard. So thank you very much for coming, Mr. Stokes. Right now we're going to show a video regarding the position of Mr. Adam Schiff, Congressman Adam Schiff, regarding Syria. Let's take a look and then we'll come join you back. Thank you very much.
Bring in Congressman Schiff. We've got about a minute left, Congressman. There's a growing sense that the Obama administration's international conference in Geneva isn't working, isn't going to solve the problem of Syria. Do we need a reset in the administration's policy, one, to oppose the Assad regime, two, to make sure that they live up to their commitments, which they aren't at this point, of turning over chemical weapons, and third, to address this growing extremist threat inside Syria, and especially the idea of them coming home to the U.S.?
Well, first of all, that growing extremist threat that you mentioned that Mike was talking about is probably going to be the most pernicious threat to the country for the next 10 years. So it is a very serious problem. We're already seeing it in Egypt, where some of the jihadis trained in Syria are now attacking the Egyptian government. And, of course, they're trying to train people to attack us here on our homeland. In terms of the Geneva talks, they haven't been successful. In fact, no one has been successful here. Our policy hasn't. The Russians haven't been successful. The regime hasn't. The opposition hasn't. It's a bloody stalemate with horrific humanitarian proportions, of horrible proportions. Do we need a reset? It's hard to see what the reset will be. I'm not sure that the United States getting deeply militarily involved is going to contribute to an end to this conflict. I think we have to try to keep the pressure on with both a bottom-up strategy like we're seeing in Geneva, and more importantly probably is what will happen outside of Geneva, and that is we need to talk to the nations that are fighting by proxy in Syria, to the Iranians, to the Russians, to the Saudis, to the Turks, to the Qataris, and try to reach a resolution here. And I think the resolution is a Syria without Assad. He's not indispensable to any of us. There are goals we all want to see in Syria after the conflict, and they're not necessarily the same, but we don't need Assad in power.
Of course, there's no indication that Assad plans to go anywhere. Congressman Schiff, Congressman McCall, want to thank you both so much for coming in today.
Thanks.
Okay. Thank you for coming back to our show. Right now I have with me my second guest, Mr. Ara Manugyan, who will be presenting various issues regarding the policies that the United States is having in the Middle East, and especially the positions and the policies of Congressman Adam Schiff. And I want to give the voice right now to him. Let him start and let him give his presentation. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Hada, for having me on today.
Thank you.
As you know, I've been as active as you have in this regard to what's going on in the Middle East, because it is a destructive policy, and it's not only affecting the people of the Middle East, but it's affecting the people at home here in the U.S. Their families that go to war, they lose their children, they lose fathers. You know, it's a tragedy. It really is a tragedy. And in the Middle East, of course, you know, there's been over 181,000 people that have been killed in Syria alone since this conflict began. And that's a tragedy. And that's why we have to be active. We have to be responsible people. These are our guns that are being used in Syria, in the Middle East, to kill innocent people, children, you know, and so on. And so what I want to do is...
And they are doing it sort of indirectly through ISIS and through al-Qaeda and all that.
Well, I don't know if you want to say indirectly. I would say that's more like a proxy army. Whoever we're arming in Syria, because it's a sovereign nation and it has a democratically elected president, and now
we saw that this Mr. Schiff saying Syria without Assad.
Right. And that's the whole point is it's a sovereign nation, and what sovereignty, for those that don't know what sovereign means, sovereign is like the top of the top. It's the person, it is the ruler of that. So we're a sovereign nation, so our president is our leader. And though he doesn't always lead us the way that we'd like to see him lead, he's been elected, whether it's legitimately or not. He is our leader. We have to recognize him as our leader. As do we have to recognize the president of Syria, Bashar al-Assad, who is the president of Syria, and he was democratically elected, and he was re-elected last year. And that didn't make... during the peace talks, you remember?
Yes.
And they said, the U.S. didn't recognize him as being elected. So, but let's move on beyond that. And what I want to do is, we have some videos that we're going to share with you, and I want to roll the first set of videos that I brought. And it's 3 separate videos, and it's going to give us an idea of who's fighting on the ground, who are these people. So let's roll those videos.
But all this points out the difficulty that we've had in getting Turkey mobilized. They have been, thus far, a very reluctant partner in the coalition to fight ISIS. Earlier on, Turkey had a very open border.
What you need to know is that what is happening in Syria is an enormous problem for the United States. Al-Assad may be a poor leader, but at least he allowed the people in Syria, regardless of their religious beliefs, to live at peace. Al-Qaeda in Iraq has publicly stated that their goal is to create an Al-Qaeda superstate comprised of Iraq and Syria. By funding these so-called rebels, the U.S. government is handing Al-Qaeda the keys to that superstate. By the United States supporting the overthrow of Assad, without question, we will hand Syria over to Al-Qaeda, make no mistake. And the slaughter of millions of Syrians, including Syrian Christians, Jews, Alawites, and Muslims, will be on our hands.
بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. أنا المدعو صدام الجمل، القائد الثوري للجبهة الشرقية في هيئة الأركان، وقائد لواء الله أكبر التابع لتجمع الويد أحفاد الرسول. أعلن تبرئي من هيئة الأركان والمجلس العسكري والائتلاف، وبراءتي من القائد العام لألويد أحفاد الرسول الرائد ماهر النعيمي، والمدعو راغب الطعمة قائد تجمع أحفاد الرسول في دير الزور. وأعلن توبتي ولا أخشى في الله لومة لائم، وأوجه نداء إلى إخواني في الجيش الحر للتبرؤ من المجالس العسكرية وهيئة الأركان والائتلاف اللذان يدعوان إلى مقاتلة إخوان الإسلاميين وعدم تمكين شرع الله في الأرض. المشروع بشكل عام الجيش الحر كل مخابرات العالم مشتركة فيه. المخابرات الأردنية، المخابرات السعودية، المخابرات الإماراتية، المخابرات القطرية والغربية طبعا كلها اللي موجودة أكثر ما نعرفهم لكن موجودة. تقدر تقول أمريكا أكيد، بريطانيا، فرنسا، يعني الرؤوس هذول موجودين. تشكيل باجتماعات الأركان، باجتماعات المجالس العسكرية كله يكونوا موجودين. بالفترة الأولى للثورة السورية كان الملف مستلمته قطر، بعد فترة غيروا على السعودية، يعني بحجة أن قطر ما تدعم غير إخوان المسلمين وأن مشروع فاشل سوري، فاستلموا الملف المخابرات السعودية في الفترة الأخيرة. أمير سلمان يعني يشغل منصب نائب وزير الدفاع السعودي، وهو مسؤول عن الملف السوري حاليا، يعني قلت لك قطر كانت مسؤولة فهو استلم الملف عنه الأمير سلمان. طبعا الأمير سلمان معروف إنه أخو الأمير بندر آل سعود. كانت موجودة المخابرات الأردنية والقطرية والإماراتية وسليم إدريس، ما كان في مخابرات عالمية موجودة. نعم الجيش الحر. طبعا المنطقة الجنوبية يعني أنا نعرف كونها بالأركان الغوطة أو الشام أو درعا، تدربت كوادر كثير بالأردن على يد المخابرات اللي كانوا الأردنية أو الغربية، والكل يعرف أن الأردن يعني مخابرات إسرائيلية. إسرائيل موجودة بالأردن، كل الناس تعلم هذا الشيء.
Is the United States supporting al-Qaeda in Syria? Reality Check looked at a report by Reuters last week that indicates the answer is yes. So why did an Irish journalist claim that Ben was supporting propaganda in support of Syria's leader? Ben has the Reality Check you won't see anywhere else.
It was Sunday when Anonymous was able to hack the Reuters news service Twitter account. Well, as part of that, they tweeted our Reality Check based on a Reuters article that the Obama administration is secretly providing support to opposition forces in Syria. Here's a clip from that report. But the big question here that no one is asking, who are these rebels that the U.S. is supporting? Well, buried at the bottom of that Reuters article, quote, recent news reports from the region have suggested that the influence and numbers of Islamist militants, some of them connected to al-Qaeda or its affiliates, have been growing among Assad's opponents. In response, a pro-opposition reporter from the Irish Times Online, Mary Fitzgerald, called our story pro-Assad propaganda. So is that true? Are we shilling for Assad? Well, maybe we're just shilling for the truth. Fact number one. There is no question that al-Qaeda fighters are part of the opposition forces attempting to overthrow Syria's government. From the New York Times, July 25th. One Qaeda operative, a 56-year-old known as Abu Thuha, who lives near Kirkuk in Iraq, spoke to an Iraqi reporter from the New York Times on Tuesday. Quote, we have experience now fighting the Americans and more experience now with the Syrian revolution, he said. Our big hope is to form a Syrian Iraqi Islamic State for all Muslims and then announce our war against Iran and Israel and free Palestine. Well, we already know that much of the opposition in Libya to overthrow Gaddafi were al-Qaeda fighters. But if we look at history, none of this is anything new. Fact number two, the creation of al-Qaeda wasn't Islamic fundamentalism. It was the CIA. The Mujahideen was created by the CIA to cause problems for the Soviets. And you might say that's crazy talk, right? Here's Secretary of State Hillary Clinton.
To be fair, we had helped to create the problem we're now fighting. How? Because when the Soviet Union invaded Afghanistan, we had this brilliant idea that we were going to come to Pakistan and create a force of Mujahideen, equip them with Stinger missiles and everything else to go after the Soviets inside Afghanistan.
So it's not a conspiracy theory, it's history. And it's history that's being repeated in Libya and now in Syria. But there is a bigger problem here, one that every American should be questioning. We're fighting al-Qaeda in Afghanistan, but we're also bombing al-Qaeda targets in Pakistan and in Yemen. And as we do that, something occurs known as collateral damage. Hundreds of civilians in Yemen have been killed in just the first half of 2012 by U.S. airstrikes aimed at al-Qaeda fighters. From NPR. In the mid-May strike in Jar, for example, Yemeni officials said 2 militants and 8 civilians were killed. According to residents we spoke with, no militants were killed, but there were 17 to 26 civilian deaths. That was just one of more than 40 documented strikes this year alone. By the way, in that picture right there, that boy is 15 years old, and he was wounded while watching his father and brother die in one of those airstrikes. So what you need to know tonight is heavy. Our government is bombing sites around the world in an ongoing war with al-Qaeda. In Iraq, where al-Qaeda had no presence before the U.S. war, al-Qaeda is now thriving. The same al-Qaeda, yes, created by the U.S. government in order to harm the Soviets. And today, at least 13,000 civilians in Afghanistan are dead as a result of that war with al-Qaeda. So with all respect to Ms. Fitzgerald from the Irish Times, this is not propaganda. Rather, it is the question that every American should be demanding answers on from Congress and from this president. Why are we giving al-Qaeda fighters money and weapons to overthrow yet another government in the Middle East? Today, our government claims they're freeing the people of Syria. Tomorrow, if history tells us anything, we will be killing and wounding civilians in airstrikes and then referring to them as collateral damage in a war with an enemy who we brought to power. And that is Reality Check.
If you'd like to make your voice heard on the story, head over to Ben's Facebook page. Find it by searching Ben Swan.
Those who know their history will remember that Zbigniew Brzezinski was directly involved in the funding and arming of Islamic extremists in Pakistan and Afghanistan in order to weaken the Soviets.
U.S. National Security Advisor Brzezinski flew to Pakistan to set about rallying resistance. He wanted to arm the Mujahideen without revealing America's role. On the Afghan border near the Khyber Pass, he urged the soldiers of God to redouble their efforts.
We know of their deep belief in God, and we are confident that their struggle will succeed. That land over there is yours. You'll go back to it one day because your fight will prevail and you'll have your homes and your mosques back again because your cause is right and God is on your side.
By the way, Osama bin Laden just happened to be one of these anti-Soviet freedom fighters that the U.S. was funding and arming. This operation is no secret at this point, nor are the unintended side effects.
I mean, let's remember here, the people we are fighting today, we funded 20 years ago. And we did it because we were locked in this struggle with the Soviet Union. They invaded Afghanistan, and we did not want to see them control Central Asia, and we went to work.
Officially, the U.S. government's arming and funding of the Mujahideen was a response to the Soviet invasion in December of 1979. However, in his memoir entitled From the Shadows, Robert Gates, director of the CIA under Ronald Reagan and George Bush Sr., and Secretary of Defense under George W. Bush and Barack Obama, revealed that the U.S. actually began the covert operation 6 months prior with the express intention of luring the Soviets into a quagmire. The strategy worked. The Soviets invaded, and the 10 years of war that followed are considered by many historians as being one of the primary causes of the fall of the USSR. This example doesn't just establish precedent. What we're seeing happen in Iraq, Afghanistan, and Syria right now is actually a continuation of an old story. Al-Nusra and ISIS are ideological and organizational descendants of these same extremist elements that the U.S. government made use of 30 years ago. The U.S. then went on to create a breeding ground for these extremists by invading Iraq in 2003. Had it not been for the vacuum of power left by the removal and execution of Saddam, al-Qaeda in Iraq, aka ISIS, would not exist. And had it not been for Washington's attempt at toppling Assad by arming, funding, and training shadowy militant groups in Syria, there is no way that ISIS would have been capable of storming into Iraq in June of 2014. On every level, no matter how you cut it, ISIS is a product of the U.S. government's twisted and decrepit foreign policy.
About 10 days after 9/11, I went through the Pentagon and I saw Secretary Rumsfeld and Deputy Secretary Wolfowitz. I went downstairs just to say hello to some of the people on the Joint Staff who used to work for me, and one of the generals called me and he said, "Sir, you got to come in. You got to come in and talk to me a second." I said, "Well, you're too busy." He said, "No." He says, "We've made the decision. We're going to war with Iraq." This was on or about the 20th of September. I said, "We're going to war with Iraq. Why?" He said, "I don't know." He said, "I guess they don't know what else to do." So I said, "Well, did they find some information connecting Saddam to al-Qaeda?" He said, No. He says, "There's nothing new that way. They've just made the decision to go to war with Iraq." He said, "I guess it's like we don't know what to do about terrorists, but we've got a good military and we can take down governments." And he said, "I guess if the only tool you have is a hammer, every problem has to look like a nail." So I came back to see him a few weeks later, and by that time we were bombing in Afghanistan. I said, "Are we still going to war with Iraq?" And he said, "Oh, it's worse than that." He said, he reached over on his desk, he picked up a piece of paper, and he said, He said, I just got this down from upstairs, meaning the Secretary of Defense's office today, and he said, this is a memo that describes how we're going to take out 7 countries in 5 years, starting with Iraq and then Syria, Lebanon, Libya, Somalia, Sudan, and finishing off Iran. The truth is about the Middle East is, had there been no oil there, it would be like Africa. Nobody is threatening to intervene in Africa. The problem is the opposite. We keep asking for people to intervene and stop it. And there's no question that the presence of petroleum throughout the region has sparked great power involvement. Whether that was the specific motivation for the coup or not, I can't tell you, but there was definitely, there's always been this attitude that somehow we could intervene and use force in the region.
So this is what we have. This is the reality. This is, as Ben Swan said, this is history. This is not a conspiracy theory. It's what's going on. And to better understand who Adam Schiff is, I just want to just give you a general idea who supports Adam Schiff. First of all, I want to say that we don't have time to show a video, but we made numerous attempts to visit with Adam Schiff. And Adam Schiff, this video you'll be able to find on our website, No Bombs for Syria, by the way. This is our website, nobombsforsyria.com. And we made numerous attempts to see him, Harut and myself, and we were only intimidated and avoided. But Adam Schiff brags about how his door is always open to all his constituents, and we are his constituents. So what I want to do is just tell you who supports Adam Schiff, just give you an idea. I'm not going to give you exact names of companies, but we're publishing those too. You'll be able to go to the site and see those for No Bombs for Syria. The top supporter are pro-Israeli companies. Okay? That's the top supporter of Adam Schiff. Next comes defense. And then he's got the agriculture people who are the GMO people, presumably within that. He's got all sorts of trade unions. He's got electrical, I don't know what, everybody that's connected. He's got Parsons, and they're the ones that have gotten some big contracts in Iraq to do some building there and so on. So he is working for these people. He is not working for us. He doesn't represent us. He doesn't even want to see us. If the only time he'll see us, if it's some happy occasion. On Friday, last Friday, the Friday before, he was supposed to be at Glendale College to talk about the Syria issue. Now he's scheduled to talk about the Syria issue on the 5th, the day after Election Day, because he knows that this is the one issue which he is all about. This is what he's about. From the beginning, he said Assad is bad, as far back as 2005 and before. So let's roll the next video, because I want you to see what Adam Schiff supports. And you're going to see 2 Congress representatives speaking. One is Adam Schiff and one is Rand Paul. And let's learn about what's going on over in Syria and who we're supporting according to Adam Schiff and Rand Paul. Let's roll that video.
Mr. Speaker, this afternoon I will cast my vote to approve the President's funding to train and equip the moderate Syrian opposition forces. I do so after long consideration and mindful of the difficulties of vetting such a force during the middle of a brutal civil war. Any decision to supply arms to combatants must be weighed carefully. Indeed, for the last several years I've opposed arming the Syrian rebels out of a concern for our ability to properly vet such troops and the fear that weapons we provide may end up in the wrong hands. Those concerns persist, but they have been overcome by the growing menace of ISIL and the willingness of our regional allies to play a greater and open role in the support of these forces.
I warned a year ago that involving us in Syria's civil war was a mistake, that the inescapable irony is that someday the arms we supply would be used against us or Israel. That day's now. ISIS has grabbed up from the U.S., from the Saudis, from the Qataris, weapons by the truckload. And we are now forced to fight against our own weapons, and this body wants to throw more weapons into the mix. The New York Times also reports that there were huge arms and financial transfers from Qatar to the Syrian rebels, beginning as early as 3 years ago. No one really knows where all of this is going to end up, where these arms are going to wind up. Jane's Terrorism Center noted that the transfer of Qatari weapons to targeted groups has the same practical effect of transferring the weapons to al-Nusra, a violent jihadist group. Let me repeat that. Jane's defense analyst says that if you give the weapons to the so-called moderate rebels, it's the same as giving it to al-Nusra. The New York Times further detailed that even Sudan has been sending anti-tank missiles and other arms to Syria. Hard to argue there's not enough weapons floating around over there. So the idea that these rebels haven't been armed really is ludicrous. It's also ludicrous to believe that we know where all the money and all the arms and all the ammunition will wind up, or who will wind up benefiting from these arms. Why? Because we don't even know who all these groups are. Even if we think we do, the loyalties shift on a daily basis. The groups have become amorphous, with alleged moderates lining up side by side with jihadists. Not to mention that, guess what? Some of these people don't tell the truth. And finally, moderates have been now found to sell their weapons. In fact, there's accusations by the family of Steve Stokes, who was recently killed by the barbarians. There are accusations that he was sold by moderate rebels to the jihadists. Remember clearly that the president and his Republican allies have been clamoring for over a year for airstrikes against Assad. Assad was our enemy last year. This year, he's our friend. Had all those airstrikes, though, occurred last year in Syria, today ISIS might be in Damascus. They say the definition of insanity is doing the same thing over and over again, expecting a different result. We gave 600 tons of weapons to the rebels, and they got weaker and weaker, and ISIS grew stronger. Perhaps by throwing all of these weapons into the civil war, we actually degraded Assad's ability to counter them. So perhaps Assad might well have taken care of the radical jihadists, and he can't because of the weapons. Perhaps we've created a safe haven. The other night, the president said in his speech, he said that it will be a policy of his administration to leave no safe haven for anyone who threatens America. Sounds good, except for the last 3 years, we've been creating a safe haven for ISIS. ISIS has grown stronger because we've been arming the resistance that ISIS is part of. Many former officials are very forthright with their criticism. According to the former ambassador to Iraq and Syria, our ambassador, he says, we need to do everything we can to figure out who the non-ISIS opposition is, because frankly, we don't have a clue. Think about this. We are voting or obscuring the vote in a spending bill to send $500 million worth of arms to Syria, to people who we say are the vetted, moderate Syrian rebels. Well, guess what? One of the men with the most knowledge on the ground of this, who's been our ambassador to Iraq and Syria, says, we don't have a clue who the moderates are and who the jihadists are, and even if they tell you they are the moderates, oh, we love Thomas Jefferson. Give us a shoulder-fired missile. We love Thomas Jefferson. Can you trust these people? There are estimates that half of the Free Syrian Army has defected, many of them to al-Nusra and to al-Qaeda and to ISIS. These are the people your representatives are going to vote to send arms to. Half of them have defected. Half of them are now fighting with the jihadists. We've proven time and again that we don't know how to vet these leaders. Two groups that were initially provided U.S. aid and help last year are good examples. A top official of Ahrar al-Sham, one of the largest rebel groups at the time, announced publicly that he now considers himself to be allied with al-Qaeda. Just yesterday, our ambassador, our most recent ambassador to Syria, Robert Ford, said that the moderate forces have and will tactically ally with al-Qaeda, with al-Qaeda-linked Nusra. Listen carefully. Your representatives are sending $500 million to people who will tactically ally with al-Qaeda. The interventionists clamor for boots on the ground. We should remember they were wrong about Iraq. They were wrong about Libya. They were wrong about Syria. When will we quit listening to the advocates who have been wrong about every foreign policy position of the last 2 decades? When does a track record of being consistently wrong stop you from being a so-called expert when the next crisis comes up? We should remember that they were wrong. There were no WMDs. That Hussein, Gaddafi, and Assad were not a threat to us. Doesn't make them good, but they were not a threat to us. We should remember that radical Islam now roams the countryside in Libya and in Syria and in Iraq. We should remember that those who believe that war is the answer for every problem were wrong. We should remember that the war against Hussein, the war against Gaddafi, the war against Assad has all led to chaos. That intervention enhanced the rise of radical Islam and ultimately led to more danger for Americans.
So, Harut?
What a difference between what Adam Schiff says and what Mr. Paul says.
Yes.
And Mr. Schiff from the beginning said that this is a civil war. There was no civil war in Syria. There was no uprising in Syria. Even if there was, it may be 2 or 3%. That does not make the whole country an uprising.
That would mean that Occupy Wall Street was a civil war going on in America when that started. So why didn't anybody intervene and send us weapons so we can fight against the imperialists in Washington, D.C., right? Because it wasn't a civil war. But here's another reality. Go ahead.
It was simply a foreign intervention, and that's what's happening in Iraq from day one. And when we say foreign intervention, this is U.S., Israeli, Turkish, and Saudi managed plan to destroy the Middle East and to control the oil, which was presented by the General Wesley Clark.
Yes.
So, and now after all these presentations that we saw, how can anybody believe what the United States or its mainstream media is saying about the current conflict involving the Islamic State? How can you believe France or the United Kingdom? So this is unbelievable that the people of this country is, especially Armenians, because this is a matter of justice, and there's genocide happening in the Middle East, and we have Armenian organizations, no need to give names, Armenians who have suffered genocide. Today we have Armenian organizations supporting people like Adam Schiff, who is supporting destruction of the Middle East, genocide, and massacres.
And you know, anybody that supports Adam Schiff really is supporting similar acts to what a genocide is, and they have no right to complain that their genocide hasn't been recognized. I'm sorry, as harsh as that may sound. And the reality is that these hardcore, patriotic, supposedly, Armenian groups are supporting Adam Schiff for their own personal, selfish gains because they think that Adam Schiff can get them genocide recognition, and everything that Adam Schiff has done in terms of just genocide recognition has come out to a big zero. Any bill, any motion that he's passed has died on the floor before it's even gone to vote. Adam Schiff has done nothing except do that of his supporters, and his supporters, again, are pro-Israeli organizations, or companies that are pro-Israeli, and it's on the website. We'll have that posted on No Bombs for Syria. Defense. Every time a war goes on, more weapons have to be made, and these are the people that Adam Schiff works for. He doesn't work for us. And I want to share one other fact about Adam Schiff. Adam Schiff's family hasn't lived in the 28th district since 2002. In his second term, he sold his home and moved his family back to Maryland, and they live at 82, you can Google this on Google Maps or Google Street, it's there. 8204 Windsor View Terrace, Pontiac, Maryland, 20854. And there is where his children go to school, and there is where his wife is involved in the PTA, and there is where he spends the majority of his time. He comes and he visits us here, and he has a rented apartment in Burbank. He lives on 1st Street in Burbank down near the mall. And this is who Adam Schiff is. This is who Adam Schiff is. Anybody that votes for Adam Schiff this time around that knows what's going on, all I can say is God be with you, because the terrorists that we're creating, that Adam Schiff is helping to create, are going to come here one day, as they're warning us about. They're not a threat today. Syria has never posed a threat to us. Iraq has never posed a threat to us. Iran has never posed. None of these countries have posed a direct threat to us. So what I'd like to do, Harut, is I'll let you decide. Which video would you like to show?
Before that, I just want to say that the Western powers, are they really concerned of overthrowing the ISIS or overthrowing the Syrian government of Bashar al-Assad? So, and it's very clear that, and in fact, Bashar al-Assad's army is the only army, the only power that has consistently fought against ISIS and given their lives. They are heroic people protecting their country from foreigners, and we Armenians are supporting this kind of terrorists, whether USA or whether whoever they are. And believe it or not, 100% of Armenians living in Aleppo are with Bashar al-Assad, 100%. And they have his picture all over their houses or their businesses. And we have Armenian organizations supporting someone like Adam Schiff, who is fighting against the interests of the Armenians in Syria. And right now, the whole culture that we have built for the past 100 years is being destroyed by people supported by Adam Schiff and Armenians supporting Adam Schiff.
But it's not even 100 years of culture. Remember, Aleppo and that region goes back thousands of years. Armenians have lived there for thousands of years, before the genocide even. So this is the ancient people, one of the largest communities.
The whole culture, the whole civilization is being destroyed, and who benefits from it? The number one benefiting are Israel and Turkey. Both of them want to continue. This is the second genocide organized by Turkey, directly and indirectly by Israel and the United States. So people, it's up to you. It's about time to wake up. I mean, if you're sleeping, wake up. That's all I can say. Let's show another video, a short video, interview between Mr. Ara Khachadurian, who is the English editor of Aspar's newspaper. Only 2 sections from that interview with Mr. Adam Schiff. Let's take a look. Thank you.
But all this points out the difficulty that we've had in getting Turkey mobilized. They have been, thus far, a very reluctant partner in the coalition to fight ISIS. Earlier on, Turkey had a very open border, and a lot of ISIS fighters could get into Syria by transiting through Turkey. Turkey was the main hub for fighters going in. And whether this was done deliberately or not, I think the reality is that Turkey welcomed sort of all comers that were willing to fight the regime of Bashar al-Assad. Similarly, some of the Gulf nations sent their funding and supplies to anyone fighting the regime, even though we and others were warning both Turkey and our Gulf allies that we need to be very careful about who we're supporting in the region, because there are some very bad actors there. Chief among them ISIS, but also the official franchise of al-Qaeda, al-Nusra. So, there's a continuing responsibility for those Gulf allies, as well as Turkey, to clamp down on weapons and money getting to the ISIS fighters. We also need Turkey to do a much better job on stopping the flow of oil by ISIS smuggled through Turkey and sold on the market, because this is helping to fund this terrorist organization.
It's interesting because, welcome back everyone. I'm continuing my conversation with Representative Adam Schiff. Thank you once again for coming to the studio. We're talking about Turkey's role in the conflict right now vis-a-vis ISIS. But I'm also looking at the U.S. response, sort of a disparity, as if you will, in the last couple of months about various different crises. Here is the U.S. imposing these rather rough sanctions on Russia for annexing Crimea and moving into Ukraine. But what Turkey is doing right now, I think, warrants some kind of a sanction from the United States. Why is this disparity going on? And we've definitely seen the disparity by the U.S. with vis-a-vis the Karabakh conflict. So,
well, as disappointing as the Turkish reaction has been to our efforts to form this coalition to go after ISIS, it is still a very different situation than Russia invading its neighbors and claiming its territory as its own. Nonetheless, I do think we have to be much stronger with Turkey. They have to become a full partner in going after this, not only because we ask them to, but it's in their own national interest to do so. They're going to have a major militant problem on their own hands if they fail to deal with this. Already, the fact that Turkey largely stood by as Kobani was under assault has resulted in widespread demonstrations throughout Turkey by the very large Kurdish population within that country. So it's certainly in our interest, it's in the international community's interest, it's in Turkey's interest to be a much more fulsome member of this coalition and to recognize
Դեսանք ինչ ծևի պասիվ մոդեցում ունի Adam Schiff-ը Թուրքիո հանդեպ Թուրքիո մեջ ով ջան չի շարժիր առանց Ամերիկայի գիտակցության եւ հրամանին ուրեմն երբ որ Թուրքիան այդ բոլորը գնե եւ Ամերիկան ոչինչ գնե ասե թե Ամերիկան եւ Թուրքիան միասին են եւ հետեւաբար մարդու վրա խնդագոր բարոն Adam Schiff-ը երբ ինքը ոչինչ գնե հիմա պիտի դենք ուրիշ տեսարիզմը.
So let me just introduce this really quick, this video that's coming up. This video that's coming up is what not only the mainstream media doesn't talk about, but even alternative media doesn't talk about. So let's roll this and let's find out what is this conflict really about.
Basically, we felt there is a group, which are the Muslim Brotherhoods, are rising up again, backed by the West for a regime change. The idea of everything that happened in the Arab Spring is regime change, trying to bring the Islamists into power. Ask me why the United States wants to put hands with the Islamists, because the rules of Bashar al-Assad did not suit him well. The man refused to kneel to the United States, refused to kneel to the imperialists, decided that the pipelines of Qatar that wanted to put the gas, that's in 2009. Qatar, Saudi Arabia, United States trying to befriend Bashar al-Assad. Turkey became friend with Bashar al-Assad just in 2009.
Okay.
To try and get that pipeline gas from Qatar to Turkey, the only way you can get to Europe is through Syria. It's the gate to Europe. That's why Syria is so important, because it's maybe a fuel, transit area. You cannot pass any Gulf gas but through Syria. When Syria refused and decided to go with Iran and Russia, okay, into multi-billion-dollar contract, Syria showed sovereignty. We are a sovereign nation. We choose whatever best for us. Our historical allies are Iran and Russia and China, and the BRICS country are never been the United States. Not that we have any animosity against the United States, but the United States decided to go with Israel against the Palestinians. Syria took the side of the Palestinians against, Yeah. So historically, Syria supported the Palestinian resistance. Syria did not want to have peace with Israel until the last Palestinian decided to have peace with Israel, until the Palestinian right of returns to their homeland happened. And that's why Syria had been targeted from way before they even entered Iraq.